Blessings and welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we are in Ecclesiastes. We're going to finish out the book in chapters 8 through 12. Then we're going to jump over to 1 Kings 11 and look at 3 verses and 2 Chronicles. And I'll just tell you right now that 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles are just short accounts of the death of Solomon. So I'm not going to go into those, but they are part of the story in Ecclesiastes because we're kind of finishing up Solomon's story here. But today, got into Ecclesiastes chapter 8 verse 1, and just like in days and weeks past, there are so many law enforcement takeaways just in chapter 8 that it'll take most of our time. And yeah, so let's hop into chapter 8 verse 2. It says, now before I start that, we've got to understand that Ecclesiastes was written by Solomon, who was given all this great wisdom by God. Now, it is man wisdom. I mean, it is human wisdom. So that's the perspective that King Solomon is that's the glasses he's looking through. So when we see this, we've got to understand he's talking as a king would talk to the subjects. So he's saying in verse 2, I say, keep the commands of the king because of the oath before God. So I thought, well, gosh, law enforcement officers, we take oaths. Is this an oath that we should obey the king because of an oath that Solomon took? Or without getting into that, I'll tell you, I researched it. I looked through all 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, 1st, 2nd Samuel, everywhere I could find, and I found a lot of places where Solomon prays, where Solomon gets wisdom from God, but there is no documentation of Solomon ever actually taking an oath. So I thought, okay, is this the oath of a person who follows God? Because it says the oath. I mean, it's like it is the only oath. And we understand that the only oath that counts is our oath to God. When we decide to live for Jesus Christ, we make that commitment, that covenant to follow him all the days of our lives and be image bearers of God. We want to reflect his image everywhere we go. With the Jews back in these times, the Jewish people would make a commitment, and they would make a covenant and an oath to God. So we're going to look at this from the oath of a believer in God, and then we'll just kind of skim over law enforcement oath real quick. But it says we're to keep the commandments of the king because of our oath. And we know as New Testament believers that we obey the authority set before us because Romans 13 spells that out, and it says we have to do it. Now, I understand that's New Testament. But Old Testament was very similar. And when we look at where he says keep the commandments of the king, we obviously don't live in King Solomon's times, so it would be ridiculous for us to think, gosh, I must obey King Solomon's commands. No, we have to look at this verse and see how it applies to us today. So the king represents authority. So by understanding that, it basically says keep the commandments of the authority set before you, which is the same thing that Romans chapter 13 says. It's kind of like this is the Old Testament Romans 13 compared to our mandate in the New Testament Romans 13. And I really like that Romans 13 is confirmed. It's like you've got the Old Testament saying, but let's go ahead and confirm it for New Testament believers so they don't just look at that and go, oh, that's Old Testament. No, it's for Old and New Testament. So it's really cool how it is in both Testaments. So seeing that, we understand that we are to obey the authority set before us. And I like the way Jesus confirmed this. We see where Jesus is at the wedding in Canaan where he performs his very first miracle. And the Old Testament 10 Commandments say, obey your father and mother. Well, Jesus' mom there, and she tells the servants, follow him and do whatever he tells you to do. And Jesus is, because they ran out of wine, Jesus is like, Mom, why are you involving me in this? Nevertheless, he obeys the command of his mom because she was the authority set before him. It's really interesting. Then when Jesus is brought in for the 6 trials right before he's crucified, the high priest gives him an order. And back in those days when the high priest gave you an order to do something or to tell you to testify, a good Jew was held to that and had to obey that authority. Jesus is keeping his mouth shut, and then all of a sudden the high priest says, "Tell us who you are." And he confronts Christ, and Christ obeys his authority, and he says, "It is as you say, I am the Son of Man. I am God's son. I am who I am." I mean, so he obeys the authority and sets that example. Then kind of the last example I want to hit, when he's standing before Pilate, and Pilate's asking him questions, and he really doesn't answer Pilate, and Pilate says, "Don't you understand? I have the authority to set you free or condemn you to death." And Jesus speaks up and says, "You have no authority except that which my Father has given you." Kind of just a confirmation of this obeying authority. And even while Jesus was in human form on this earth, he obeyed the authority set before him. Now, we've got to understand, and it goes into that as we go in chapters 3 and 5 and on through chapter 8, that we will obey the authority set before us like God commands us until it violates God's orders or God's commands. You can have a bad leader give you an order that is contrary to what your actual policy says. You don't have to follow that leader. You follow policy, because that leader is actually out of policy when he gives you a bad order. So the authority you obey in that instance is the policy of your government. It's not just one rogue person who gives a bad order. And that's found in chapter 8, verse 5. He who keeps a royal command, experiences no trouble, for a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure. So you know the proper procedure. Anyway, ran out of time. Great read today. If you missed some of these things, go back and read Ezekiel or Ecclesiastes, especially chapter 8, good law enforcement chapter. Tomorrow's read, we are in 1 Kings, all of chapter 12. Then jump to 2 Chronicles and read in chapter 10. Read all of chapter 10, then read chapter 11, 1 through 17. So see you back here tomorrow, and let's discuss this again.